So you don't believe that as the previous Warsaw nations are being brought into NATO, and you have this one disputed territory literally called the borderland right there, where there's a NATO expansion and an issue going on currently between Putin and Western powers trying to prevent that expansion in order to ease tensions that were going on. Obviously, you know, I'm just saying, obviously, you know, Putin's main priority, not just for Ukraine, was to annex Crimea because of the port on the Black Sea. We do know that. I mean, his military power there, as well as trade route, etc., is super vital and strategically important to him. You also do realize, which could be considered Russian propaganda, that at least he says, and I wouldn't take Putin's word very strongly, as I wouldn't take many world leaders today's word at face value. He claims to care a lot about the Russian people, the Russian Federation, of Belarus, of the Ukrainians. I mean, in World War II, you know this because the amount of troops they lost just defending Kiev. I mean, some of the troops they fought, they were a united people just recently. And if we even want to go back, I mean, back in World War II, obviously you said these countries would never take land. I mean, sometimes we live in the internet age where we think in just like the last several years, forgetting that Germany being a part of a Minsk II agreement to prevent land stealing is kind of ironic, considering it's barely been less than 100 years, and Germany's done a few things in the last 100 years, give or take, that are questionable.
We don't go back 100 years to see what foreign affairs look like now. I think we roughly look at the state of European security over the last 30 years, since the collapse of the Warsaw Pact, since the dissolution of the Soviet Union, since NATO's mission is roughly to ensure a stable amount of security in Europe. When you say things like, well, we want to make sure that Ukraine doesn't join NATO because it causes tensions with Russia, what kind of tensions? Like, this is the question that always fascinates me. People are always like, well, Russia's worried to have NATO on its border. Why? They're already up on their border in 3 countries in the Baltics to the north, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, they're already on the border there. If we want to launch nuclear missiles, you know, we don't even need to do it from there. Turkey already has nuclear missiles. Do we think that there's going to be a ground invasion into Russia from Ukraine? That's not going to happen. We know that's not going to happen because NATO doesn't attack Russia. We literally have a hotline from Washington to Russia where we make a direct call and we say, hey, do you have troops there? Because if so, we're not going to go in. Like, we take a really big effort to avoid these types of confrontations. I just don't see what the possible tension is unless we're talking about Russia being able to move in their own military and either break away states or take over parts of other sovereign nations like they've done with Georgia, like they're doing now with Ukraine. What are they trying to avoid? What is the tension?
I mean, so the tension is quite obvious. So even if we go back, you do have to look back hundreds of years. It's very important, specifically Napoleonic Wars, even World War I and World War II, looking at strategic land groups, specifically flatlands that are used to grow wheat, that are easily accessible, and a type of soil that allows a fast strategic movement, including railways, to move large amounts of equipment and troops across a geographic landscape. And Ukraine does provide that and has been used in many past wars as an exact direct route to invade eastern lands. So there is that. I don't think you have to go back fully, which is again why there's no justification for Putin himself. I do believe that Putin, if indeed truly that the eastern regions did declare independence and did not want to be a part of Western ideals or values, that we have to respect, just like, I mean, I've worked in Shanghai, I've worked in South Korea. They're very distinct and unique countries that have their own culture, prospects, and national interests, just like the United States of America. And so as you move forward, obviously he might want to protect these people. Maybe it's propaganda. He goes in saying, hey, we are giving, I believe we gave, what, 1,400 artillery with 144,000 munitions that were used to kill, like I said, 14,000 approximate people across in those regions during a conflict of separatists, which we call separatists, but he calls duly elected or a republic that naturally elected him in an actual election in 2020. So when you have 220,000 of your own citizens that have been expedited and given passports and you're in this land, I'm wondering on an international level, this is why would there continue to be a continued resistance and a fight? What benefit did Western Ukraine have to continue to provoke Eastern Ukraine, and why did they propagandize their people? Why was there this push to join NATO to lie and make it seem like there was some international duplicate or some laissez-faire idea where you can create a new economy between Ukraine and Europe without intervention from Russia, because Russia said that Ukraine needed to stay neutral, that it could not receive, back in 2014, even before then, could not receive these foreign military aid, could not have the equipment put in place. And it's like we were living in La La Land telling Ukrainian people it was going to be cool. Now you have 8 million of them as refugees in neighboring countries because they had a dream that could not be realized.
There's no justification. Every way that you talk about Ukraine is like it has to be this subservient member state to Russia's greater world plans. Every single framing. Well, what if lands in the east maybe also to talk about an election held in 2020 when Russia has had troops on the ground there since 2014 is a bit comical. It's almost like referring to the Crimean Peninsula resolutions that happened after Russia took over and said you have 2 options. You can either join us us, or you can either remain independent and then join us. The idea that you can just move in and take over places because there might be some conflict there just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make any more sense than if Southern California suddenly had a bunch of Mexican separatists there that wanted to break that away and have them join Mexico. The rest of the world wouldn't say, well, United States, you just have to kind of cede your sovereignty there and allow some of your states to break away and join Mexico. Of course not. We would hold on to that land because it's our sovereign territory. And since 1991, Ukraine has had distinct borders that have been recognized by not only the rest of the world, but Russia itself, and no amount of separatist movements, especially ones that are funded by Russia, allow them to break away and just join Russia. And then the reason why I don't like to go back historically is because when people want to go back historically, they only go back so far. You hear Putin and you hear all these other people talk about, well, the people in the East, they feel Russian, they speak Russian, they've got a lot of Russian ethnic roots. Yeah, of course, that's because during events like the Holodomor, millions of Ukrainians were forcibly starved to death, their wheat was requisitioned, and people that were trying to flee towns were shot and murdered by Soviet troops. So after millions of people die and hundreds of thousands of Russians, ethnic Russians, are shipped in, which the Soviet Union did to all of their little republics that they had gotten as part of the Soviet Union, to go back into the past and then to come forward into the future and say, well, look, there's a lot of ethnic Russians there now, to say that a prior genocide can supersede the sovereign borders drawn around a country in 1991, and then we go forward to 2020 and say, well, look, there's a lot of ethnic Russians there. That's just absolutely bizarre to me. I think that when we frame the conversation, I think we have to stop saying, well, Russia's worried about this, so they should be able to invade, or Russia likes this, so they should be able to take that. Let's look at it from the Ukraine perspective. They have a country that was recognized internationally with borders since 1991. What right does Russia or any other country have to come in and steal territory from them? I haven't heard a single justification for that.
What year were you born?
What year are we on right now?
What year were you born, I said?
1988.
Okay, so you have a country that's borders were drawn, that's technically like younger than yourself in many ways, and so you have this and you act like this is how life always was and how it always will be. You're talking about already a country built out of the collapse of another country.
It was recognized.
I do not need to justify Russia coming in. I'm saying Russia, like all international sovereignties and powers, I look at an interesting interview from Condoleezza Rice. I don't know how you guys feel about her, but what an interesting war hawk. I don't know how we justified so many invasions and so many wars recently, but I watched her on, I think it was MSNBC. She was being asked about how can a large superpower bully a smaller country and invade without UN Security Council clearance and bomb them, and she was like, I can't believe that people could do that.
You see the pivot here, though, right?
No, but what I'm saying is, I'm going, ma'am, we did that. The United States did that.
The United States has not in the past 30 years invaded a country and stolen their territory.
That's subjective when you're literally.
It's not subjective.
When you're a universal global empire. When you're a universal global empire, you don't have to occupy the same way you do. I mean, we are still in Iraq, and we just pulled out of Afghanistan. I mean, you're talking about we were occupying for many, many years. So what's going on right now is that he has not stolen it. He said that he wants it to be neutralized. So his resolution, and I'm telling you this, he hasn't even won the war. So he has not won, he has not stolen it yet, but he has identified and he has recognized the eastern region to be a part of the Donbass, a part of Russia, based upon their own elections. Now, we could even argue whether those elections were fair and free. And again, I would actually argue probably in many of Ukraine's elections have been absolutely mired in election fraud. Anytime Putin's running for president again or running for the country, he'll win because the elections are completely rigged in his favor. This is very common internationally, especially in countries that have come out from the USSR, of mass corruption across their democratically elected governments. But I will say this. Yes, we are in the middle of a conflict. So when we're referencing like he cannot go in and steal land, we do not know if there's a ceasefire, if he would pull out his military. I'm telling you this genuinely.
He's already taken Crimea. In 2014, yes. That happened. You pointed out rightly, Sevastopol, you've got the port city, and he owns that peninsula now. You cannot have this incredibly naive notion that I can't believe you truly believe this, that like, oh, well, we're just recognizing like free and independent elections there. Like, this is the same thing in 2008 that happened with Georgia. You can't just go to a place and say, oh, well, we recognize that this is an independent state, and we're going to ship in our peacekeeper troops and have them there and break that state away and take it from you, and then now we're going to work with them. Like, even if you criticize the United States' entry into Iraq or Afghanistan, which I think there's plenty of criticism to go around, we didn't do that there. We didn't go into Iraq and say, we're going to break off Kurdistan, the Kurds have their own independent country now, or we're going to take Baghdad and some of these places, and we're going to break our own like independent state out, or in Afghanistan we're going to break away. Like, even with the U.S. involvement there, we didn't go that far. And you can't keep saying like, well, 100 years ago we did this, or 50 years ago we did that. The security of Europe and the entire world kind of rests on this idea that countries function and operate in certain predictable ways. One of those things is that countries don't march into other countries and steal territory or break it away. That's just that the state of security of the world is in jeopardy if we accept that as part of the new playbook going forward. It's even independent of Ukraine, even independent of what's happening there. The idea that countries can march in and just steal territory just rewrites so many of the rules that we've established post-collapse of the Soviet Union.